we gotta talk about the SEC's options after their devastating roundhouse kick to the face by Grayscale. They are down for the count, but they are not out of options. And we gotta talk about the options and the timelines for such things. But before we get started with that, we have to discuss that there are 7, count them 7, deadlines for Bitcoin ETFs coming up next week. The earliest being September 1st or Friday, the latest between September 4th or Monday. So the SEC and its minions are not getting much rest over Labor Day weekend because they completely lost the lawsuit, and they might, just might, want to let one of these ETFs through, because if they don't want Grayscale to be the first Bitcoin spot ETF. First of all, let's reiterate the lawsuit. What the lawsuit said did not guarantee the listing of the Grayscale ETF, or did it say, like the SEC must allow Grayscale to convert their fund into an ETF. If it does, it's a great time to buy Grayscale because they're still at a 25% discount. If they are allowed to convert into an ETF, that will basically go away, I think, overnight. So there's that much of it. But outside of that, what options does the SEC have? Remember, this particular case is at the appellate level, which means if they appeal, they either appeal en banc or to the Supreme Court. En banc means like they have a full circuit court of judges and they can overturn the 3-judge panel that this was determined on, or they can basically appeal to the Supreme Court. Now that really depends on whether the Supreme Court will actually hear the case, which they might not, because the Supreme Court doesn't hear every case, obviously, and that they would actually overturn the case, which, looking at the composition of the Supreme Court, I don't think Gary Gensler would actually have much chance of winning at all at this point. So Gensler has to actually keep that in mind. He could delay, but if he actually loses at the Supreme Court level, A, it makes the SEC and him look really bad, but B, that actually applies to all jurisdictions, not just that circuit appeal of, not that just that jurisdiction where the appeals court actually has, say. So he might not actually want to do that. It would be another big blow to the SEC, another big blow to himself. So there's definitely some apprehension with Gary Gensler, and I actually think the appeal is actually a very, very poor strategy by Gary Gensler, and I'll tell you why. In an appeals case, like if you actually submit for appeal, you are not allowed to actually give any more evidence or information than what's currently there. You are simply asking the judge or the group of judges to review the decision by the earlier judge or panel and somehow rule that they actually made a mistake on their listing. You do not get to supplement more evidence, and therefore you do not get to supplement like additional evidence as to why you should actually win that lawsuit. And here's the thing, the SEC didn't actually submit any evidence at all in the initial Grayscale lawsuit. In fact, that's why the ruling came down against the SEC in the original lawsuit. It literally said, because Bitcoin futures and Bitcoin have basically the same price 99% of the time, and the SEC, and I reiterate this, the SEC did not give any further reason as why they would accept a Bitcoin futures ETF and not a Bitcoin spot ETF, their reasoning is complete nonsense. And the thing is, like, they specifically pointed that the SEC's argument of fear of manipulation didn't really work because they already allowed multiple Bitcoin futures ETFs, which are just as prone, if not more prone, to manipulation than spot ETFs. And since the SEC can't submit any new information to the Supreme Court or the en banc appeal, they are probably going to lose those as well. And that would look very, very bad for the SEC and very, very bad for Mr. Gensler. So they're probably not in a hurry to actually do something like that. So that's one thing why I don't think they'll appeal. If they do appeal, they have 90 days to actually submit the appeal. So they have to submit the appeal by late November. If they don't submit an appeal by then, they are not going to be able to appeal. So let's actually get that off the books right now. If you don't see SEC appeal by late November, they're not going to appeal. And the thing is, I don't actually think they're going to appeal. So they have essentially two options. As on Twitter, James Seifert, who is very good in this legal business, have actually said. So the first option is they have to revoke the listing of all the Bitcoin futures ETFs in order to prevent the spot ETF from listing. Because remember, the ruling reasoning was you allowed these futures ETFs to exist, even though they're just as manipulable and just as influential as the spot ETFs. So why? And the SEC couldn't answer that, so they lost the case. Now, if they go back and revoke all the futures ETFs, then like they have a reason saying like, hey, we didn't allow these futures ETFs, so we're not going to allow a spot ETF. That logic actually works pretty well. But since they're already out there and there's many of them out there, it's very, very unlikely. I think this would cause mass chaos. And this is one of the ways that Bitcoin could actually fall to like 20K or less if they start revoking every one of these Bitcoin futures ETFs. But a lot of big companies already have their projects out there. So I'm guessing this is very unlikely. This would be the worst case scenario that the SEC could do, start revoking the products that are already out there. If they don't do that, which they're unlikely to do because that would piss off a whole lot of people, not just Bitcoin investors, it would piss off these companies as well. And Gary Gensler works for these companies, so he is unlikely to do that. The other option is, well, the thing is like they can actually deny the futures, the ETF on another basis. And the only real basis is custody. Now, I'm not really sure what Grayscale has for custody, but I don't think it's a very strong argument, and they could actually be taken to court again, and they might actually have to approve the Bitcoin ETF. Now, the thing is, the SEC could just lie down and admit their loss like they should and approve the ETF, or at least revisit it, but I don't think that's like part of Gary Gensler's plan. They've been extremely aggressive, and the thing is, like, they're going to try to attack the Grayscale ETF. But the thing is, like, just the fact that they lost the lawsuit and the fact that the appeal probably isn't going to work makes them more likely to actually accept a lawsuit, accept an ETF this week into next week, because they don't want Grayscale to be the first or only ETF out there. So that's the whole logic. I'm hoping the Grayscale case, even though it doesn't guarantee that Grayscale will actually get an ETF, will actually light a fire under the SEC's ass and maybe just turn one more commissioner over to the let's approve an ETF side. Because remember, Gary Gensler might be the face of the SEC because he's the head of the SEC, but Hester Pierce and one more commissioner does not agree with the SEC's reasoning for denying these ETFs. And all they need is one more person. It's a majority vote. So they already got 2 of the 5 votes. If they can get the 3rd vote over, the SEC will actually approve of this ETF. And there's a lot of pressure on the SEC to approve the ETF, both from like BlackRock and Fidelity, which some people think are their bosses, and also from the entire crypto industry as a whole, and now from the courts as well, because basically they got slapped aside by the judge. And I think Gensler and the rest of them know they're not very likely to actually win that appeal. So Bitcoin has several ways it can go. It can either go to hero or to zero. To zero would mean like the SEC starts basically denying or backtracking all their Bitcoin futures ETFs in order to deny that Bitcoin spot ETF. They really wanted that bad. But that, like I said, that would piss off a lot of people. That would be the worst case scenario. Bitcoin goes under 20,000. Or they could just give up and approve one or more of the ETFs, and that would actually send Bitcoin soaring over 50,000. Or like, they'll just delay and try to like use their delay tactics to actually not get a Bitcoin ETF until the end of this year or the beginning of next year, which I think is much, much more likely. They might try to come up with a BS excuse as why to not accept the Grayscale ETF. But if they actually do that, Grayscale can take them to court again. And since the judges weren't that friendly to the SEC this time, I don't think they'll be that friendly to the SEC next time if they get sued again. And eventually the court might just intervene and say like, bitch, accept this ETF, and they'll actually have to do it. If the SEC does nothing, that could actually happen anyways. The thing is, like, the SEC's stall tactic isn't working anymore, and they're going to have to make decisions one way or the other, and they actually have to have good justification for their decisions. They just can't make up like some random BS decision now and basically try to fly it by the judge, because these judges just aren't having it. And they're actually providing justice to crypto investors by not ruling in the favor of the SEC. It seems like every single jurisdiction and every single case that the SEC has actually come up with in regards to crypto is actually coming out this way. So the courts are actually turning against the SEC in that respect. And these appeals that they might be looking at aren't really going to work all that well. So they can stall and delay for a couple of months, but in the end, I don't think they can possibly win. And their time is coming. At least Gary Gensler's time is coming where he will have to admit defeat and basically give up on some of these crypto issues. And you know what? I think that's why Gensler is starting to pivot to AI some more, because he sees the writing on the wall that he's not going to win a lot of these crypto cases. Like the Ripple loss was only the tip of the iceberg, and now you have the Grayscale loss. And there's a very good chance that he will suffer a Coinbase loss sometime in the future. And the Grayscale loss was even a worse loss than the Ripple loss, because at least in the Ripple loss, the judge agreed with him on some parts of like some things were actually securities. In this one, the judges were just like, bruh, your reasoning is complete BS. Therefore, you lose entirely. And basically, like they got bitch slapped to the side by these judges that ruled in favor of Grayscales. So those are their options right now. They could revoke all the futures ETFs and completely tank the market, which I don't think they will. They can give up and accept an ETF, or they can try to delay for at most 3 more months. Because like after those 3 more months, that decision is going to be upon them. And I don't know if any of their other excuses are actually going to work. So exciting times. We might get an ETF by December of this year. I didn't think it was going to happen, but now since they won this case, I think it's very, very possible that it's going to happen. So that's the news for today. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe. Hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.